Okay, how's everybody doing out there? Hope you're having a nice week. We're coming down here to the last couple weeks, I guess, of the program. And so we got a couple more videos here to watch to kind of get you guys ready to do your final presentation and your final paper, final sort of report. And so we're going to use these last couple little mini lectures to kind of prepare you guys for what you need to do so that you can do a good job on the final report and the final presentation. So we're going to talk about kind of, I guess you could kind of think of like tips for how to do this stuff, but also some things to keep in mind and to think about while you're kind of doing your final analysis and trying to put together the final sort of report presentation proposal stuff. So today we're going to talk about the topic of research critiques, which is essentially when you guys are doing data science analysis, you always need to be critical of both yourself, your own findings, the results that you're seeing that are coming out of the models that you're producing, but also as you look at other people's work and other people's research and things you read for the lit review, you should also be critical of things that other people are saying. We always, in data science, want to be very, I don't want to say skeptical, but we always want to have kind of a critical eye for everything. And that includes the stuff we do as well. It's not just about being sort of, critical of other people, but it's also about being critical of ourselves and making sure we're not making mistakes or propagating, bad information. And so that's something that we need to think about. So one thing that I always tell people is, first of all, let's define what we mean by critique and critical. A lot of people assume that by critique or critical, we mean something bad. And that is true sometimes when your mom is scolding you when you're a child. But also critiques can be constructive. They can be positive. They can be trying to point out the good things that people have done so that they can try to build on them, right? We have this idea, at least in English in the United States, of constructive criticism, but even more broadly than that, a critique should always look at what went wrong and also what went right. And both of those are important for us to understand how to improve in the future. And so when you guys are kind of working on your final presentation, your final proposal, you need to do this both for your own sort of analysis, your own results, but also as you're sort of incorporating what you've learned from your lit review and what other people have done, also kind of take this kind of critical perspective, this critical eye, right? And look at the good and the bad, what worked, what didn't work, right? Both of those, right? And it's important you kind of do both, because if you don't do both, then you're not really being fair, or you're not really being critical. You're only kind of, you're just complaining or you're just cheerleading, right? But neither of those things are critiques. Both of those are just kind of one side, and we don't want to do one side. We want to do both. Now, there are many ways to evaluate research, including your results. Though you can evaluate research based on the way that you frame the problem. Maybe you framed it in a weird way, and that got you a kind of questionable result. Maybe you would have been better if you framed it in a different way, or maybe you would have gotten a different result. Maybe if you had kind of set up kind of the angle that you took, you would end up in a very different place. Similar to that, you can also critique the questions that were asked, right? The hypotheses. Were the questions you asked really the correct ones? And you can always kind of consider, what if we had asked different questions? Would we have come up with a different answer? Or based on your analysis, you may discover that there's like several other unanswered questions, right? Maybe you answered the question that you started with, but now that actually caused us to have several new questions. And so that is kind of also like, what if we had, kind of asked different questions to start with? There's always these things that we still don't know, right? So you can critique the way the problem is framed. You can critique the hypotheses or questions that are asked. You can obviously critique the methodology. Why did you do it that way? Why did you use those models? Why did you use that kind of analysis? Why didn't you analyze the data this way? Why didn't you use a different set of parameters in your machine learning model? Why was your deep learning architecture set up like this? Maybe you used an RNN. Why didn't you try a different type of RNN? You used a gated recurrent unit, but you could have used an LSTM, right? Or maybe you didn't need a recurrent model at all. Why didn't you just try a dense network, right? Or convolutional network, or a different type of gradient boosting, or set the parameters this way, or do this, or do that, or whatever, right? That kind of pre-processing, blah, blah, blah. You can always critique the methodology. It's probably the one that no matter what, you can always critique. I think you can critique all of these, honestly, always. But and then you can critique the results, right? You can look at the results and say these make sense, they don't make sense, right? Or maybe due to your methodology that I don't agree with, you got these results, and I think these results are misleading, right? Or maybe I think these results are great, or maybe I think some part of your results are great and part of them are questionable, right? And then your conclusions, right? Based on your results, you're going to have to interpret what you're seeing. And I disagree with your interpretation. I might think your methodology is fine and your results are okay, but I disagree on your interpretation of what those results mean, right? You can do that, right? And like I said, it's also important to critique yourself as you go through this process, and in your own paper, you kind of take a self-critical kind of approach. If you read any of my published research, you'll see me doing this. I'm constantly kind of second guessing myself, even in the papers I was writing. I was working on a paper yesterday that we're working on, a new paper, and I distinctly remember parts writing, there's something that some result we got, but there's still this thing that's not really clear, and more research is needed, right? It remains to be seen. There's this thing, and it's not really clear why it's happening. And even I have to kind of then criticize myself. This is a question we didn't ask, and we should have asked it. But then we're just going to do more research in the future, right? So always you want to be self-critical, right? And in your final reports, I'll be looking for this critique, especially in the lit review section. But I'll also probably be looking for it in your own kind of conclusion sections. And we'll talk about the sections of the report at the end of this lecture. But you should be critical of what other people have tried before. And that critique should also inform your approach. What did they do right? What did they do wrong? And how did that lead you to do the things that you did? There should be a clear connection between what you've done and what you learned through your lit review process. And you want to spell that out in your lit review and your paper. And the final presentations are going to be very quick, rapid fire, so you're not going to have a lot of time for the lit review, but you might mention a couple things related to it briefly. But it definitely needs to be part of your final written report. So kind of make sure that you have this lit review and there's this critique in there. What did other people do? What did they do right? What did they do wrong? And how did that inform what you decided to do in your own analysis? And also, like I mentioned, in your final paper conclusion, make sure you have sort of a self-critique. What if you had this to do over again in the future, what would you have done differently? What did you learn during this process that now that you finished it, you realize, well, actually that was not such a good idea? So you also want to be critical about your own work. And this is really important as a data scientist. We're always trying to improve upon what we do and try to figure out like what went right, what went wrong. And it's really important to do that, to evaluate your own work and figure out where these things occurred, right? It's also important, self-critiques are also going to be really important to counter criticism, right? When you're doing analysis and doing data analysis and data science, and you come up with some result and you go out and tell people, this is the truth, this is the answer to this problem, you're almost invariably going to get people who say, you're wrong. No, you're not, you didn't consider this factor, or you didn't do this correctly, or you know what, there's this exception to the pattern that you found and you didn't think about it. Whatever it is, you're always going to have people who are going to point their finger at you and be like, you're wrong, right? And they're going to criticize you. They're going to criticize what you've done or say that you're wrong about this or that. And one thing about doing self-critiques is they help you deal with later criticism. They help you anticipate the kinds of challenges that other people might raise against the work that you've done. And then you have like a ready-made answer. So when you're doing your final presentation, averse to the midterm updates, you just kind of talked and I didn't really say too much. But during the final presentation, I'm going to ask questions. And I'm actually going to open it up and let the other professors ask questions, or maybe people from the embassy too. And you may have people be a little critical or ask, why did you do it that way? And by doing a self-critique, you basically have a ready-made answer to a lot of potential questions that people may raise. And so you're kind of preparing yourself to deal with that. And so this is going to be a good practice for you guys doing your final presentations, but it'll also be a good practice for you later on in your data science careers to get in the habit of doing this, right? Another thing this will bring us to that we should talk about is this ethical thing. And it's something that we should kind of always keep in mind. Those who've taken data science courses have heard me talk about this a lot, but ethics, you guys have probably heard this term, ethics. Ethics is not about morality. It's not about the law. It's not legal or anything like that. Ethics is a social contract, right? Ethics is an agreed upon set of rules of social behavior. It basically comes down to like, I won't murder your family, you don't murder my family. I won't steal all your money if you don't steal all my money. I won't do this stuff to you if you don't do this stuff to me, right? I won't screw you over if you don't screw me over, right? And of course, it's a contract, so we all have to abide by it. And if anybody starts breaking, the contract, then the whole system breaks down. So ethics is a sort of agreed upon rules of social behavior that we all try to abide by, because otherwise society doesn't work, right? There's actually a very famous political philosophy book by Thomas Hobbes called Leviathan that actually spells this notion of the social contract out. Eventually led to the Scottish Enlightenment and David Hume and then John Locke. And basically the idea is that the United States of America was founded on, and most modern liberal democracies are based on this idea of Scottish Enlightenment and John Locke and those people, and going back to Leviathan even. But ethics are really tricky. It'd be really easy if it was always clear what we should do, like from an ethical standpoint. But the problem is there's almost always conflicts, right? In real life, there are very few win-win scenarios, right? There are very few situations in life where everybody wins. It's just how the world works. So usually there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers, right? Or maybe these people win and these people lose, right? Somehow or other way, right? It's very rare for everybody to win. It happens, but it's not that common. And the problem in data science that we have is that we're actually kind of often picking the winners and picking the losers, right? We're deciding that these people are going to make more money, but these other people are going to get screwed over, right? Or these people are going to gain some advantage and these people get screwed over. So a lot of times our data science solutions are actually going to be used in ways that are going to have ethical implications. And this is something we really, really need to think about. And you guys should think about it. It should be part of your final proposal, maybe your final presentation too, is what are the ethical implications for the solution that you're proposing? What are the consequences, maybe even the unintended consequences of how these things might be used in the real world? And what should we be careful about? This is something you guys need to think about as you finish up your analysis and start putting together your final report, your final presentation, right? One example of ethics in data science I always like to use in all of my classes is Bentham's panopticon, which is basically the idea, imagine you have a prison with all these cells, like a jail, right? All these cells around the outside, all these jail cells, all these little rooms, and they all have like glass doors on them so you can see into them. And they're arranged in a semicircle, right? And in the middle, or I guess a circle, not a semicircle, but in the middle, you have like a guard tower, and there's maybe a couple guards in there, they're just hanging out. And you can't really see them, but at any given moment, they might be looking into your cell. Now, the reality is there's a very small chance that there's like thousands of jail cells that at any given moment, they're actually looking into your jail cell, into your room, right? But they could be, right? Because it's a see-through, right? You can see into it. It's just a glass, right? And so they're just sitting there in the middle of this big giant room, and they could be looking at you, watching you, but you don't know, right? Now, if there's thousands of jail cells, the statistical chance that they're looking at you at any given moment is very small, especially like, they may just be playing on their phones most of the time and occasionally looking around, right? So there's probably like a less than 1% chance they're looking at you, maybe even less than that, like a less than a 10th of a percent chance, but you don't know. And you don't know when they're watching you, when they're not. And so basically every moment of every day is like you're under observation, and your behavior becomes influenced by that. In data science, we often have access now to this data, but this trail people leave on the internet when they use social media or they browse websites, and we can do a lot of really creepy stuff with it, right? And so that's kind of like Bentham's panopticon, maybe a little bit, in that people are basically, this digital footprint is like a way we could kind of create a panopticon where we can observe people at any moment of any day, and they don't know if anybody's actually watching or not. More than likely, nobody's paying attention to what you do on the internet. Nobody cares. You're not that important, and there's 7 billion people, but you don't know, right? You don't know. You don't know what somebody might be doing. And so it's a little bit creepy what the potential is, right? And this is a perfect example of ethics and data science. It's something we need to think about. Most of your solutions are also going to have this kind of, there's the good thing we're trying to do, but what about these unintended consequences that might come out of it, right? Some of your proposals that I've seen, also involve an element of potentially having some user data involved. And usually when that happens in a data science sense, that means we also need to start to think about privacy, right? What kinds of privacy guarantees should we include in our proposals and our solutions to make sure that we don't accidentally create a panopticon, or creepy things don't happen with the data, or whatever, right? And from a design standpoint, there's this notion of privacy by design, which very simply just means that privacy is something that should be thought about upfront. As we're creating our sort of solution as data scientists, we need to already be thinking about the privacy implications and how that can be, and how privacy can be kind of embedded into our solutions. And this notion is privacy by design. It's not an afterthought. Privacy is not something you worry about after you build it. It's something you think about right from the very beginning, is what kinds of privacy considerations should we include? This might be something else that you guys should consider in your final proposal, right? Especially if there's going to be some user data involved. Are there any potential privacy implications? Should we consider this? And if so, how so, right? Now, there are some legal approaches to this privacy thing, and you guys are probably familiar with them, right? So there are these eraser laws on the internet stuff now. There's a EU-US Privacy Shield and stuff like this. From a policy standpoint, actually, I often talk about this in a data science sense, but from a policy standpoint, this is really interesting because there are actually a lot of different legal frameworks around policy across the globe, and there are different rules in different countries and different places. And so it's kind of interesting, this is kind of actually an intersection between the sort of data world and the sort of public policy world. It's actually you kind of see them colliding with all these legal approaches, and some of these are maybe good ideas, and some of them maybe not. It's hard to say, but all of these are essentially trying to give users some control back over their data. Another example that you guys are probably very familiar with is GDPR, which is why these notifications pop up about cookies and allowing or rejecting cookies when you're browsing the internet. Probably noticed those in the last couple of years. That's GDPR, which came out of Europe. But if a company does any business in Europe, they have to follow GDPR, right? And so GDPR contains a bunch of different sort of components about how companies and organizations are supposed to collect and use data. And so, again, just all these different sort of legal frameworks are policy issues, and they're pretty much a direct collision between the data world, the data science world, and the public policy world. So it's actually really kind of interesting and something to kind of consider for some of you guys. When you are creating policies, these data-driven policies as part of your projects, there may be ethical implications, right? They may be due to privacy issues, or it may be because the solution you're proposing is going to benefit one group over another. And the question is that okay? It might be okay. Maybe it is actually okay for this group to benefit more for whatever reason, right? If you can justify it, but maybe it's not okay. And it's not about morality. It's not like, is this right or wrong? It's simply like we have to make a choice between this group or this group, and it's not a win-win. It's just you have to make a choice. Either make a choice or not do it, not solve the problem. So again, this is something that we need to think about carefully, and it's something you should consider in your proposal, and maybe even write about a little bit. Especially in the discussion section about kind of the implications from an ethical standpoint, a legal standpoint, policy standpoint. What are the things that we should consider? What are the potential consequences that we might want to try to anticipate, right? And so this is going to be a lot of brainstorming, right, about what could happen, right? So everyone's final report should give some consideration to all the stuff I've been talking about today. It should include your thoughts about it as part of your proposed solution, right? We should always consider the ethical aspects of things, and sort of sort of self-critiquing your own results. And this is a lot of what we want to see in as part of your discussion of your results, not just the analysis, not just your proposed solution, but kind of think a little bit more deeply about what are the potential implications or consequences from this, both good and bad, long term. And what are the kind of ethical considerations, not just for yourself, but other people may want to consider, or government officials may want to consider if they're considering implementing your proposed solution, right? So all of this is something that I'd like to see in your final report. Now, getting into that, your final report structure, as I mentioned, is going to have some different sections. These are described a little bit in your in the syllabus, but I'll kind of lay them out here. These are the things I'm looking for, and these are the things you're going to be graded on. So you might as well just take note of this slide. You should be framing the problem. You should have an introduction when you frame the problem. What is this problem, and why is it important? I've already seen this already in your guys' proposals, and some of the stuff you've already turned in, your design sketches and stuff. And so I think a lot of you guys kind of have a grip on this kind of framing the problem. The lit review, you've already kind of done that, but you need to take the sort of annotations and turn them into like a summary, right? So you want to summarize, don't give me a list of, this, but like summarize it, right? Kind of summarize. You can reference specific references, but you want to kind of summarize it all into, a few paragraphs of the kind of common trends that you're seeing in the literature, instead of describing each reference individually, right? And maybe critique too the things that you are seeing in the literature. Then you want to describe your data, which a lot of you guys have already done a little bit in your proposal stuff, so you can just kind of expand upon that. Then you want to describe your data analysis methods, so describe your methods. What kind of methodology did you use? And then, of course, after you describe your methodology, you should describe your results. So make sure you include both a description of the methodology you used and also your results. Now, some people will separate these, right? We often do when writing scientific papers, but there are times where we actually have several different analyses. So what we do is kind of interleave them. So we'll describe one set of methods, and here's our analysis, our results. And then we'll describe another analysis we did, and then our results. But sometimes we just describe all the results first, and then describe all the methods first, and then describe all the results. So sometimes we do like methods, and then a little bit of the methods, and then that results, and then these methods and that results. Sometimes we just do all the methods all at once, and then describe all the results all at once. So it kind of depends, and you'll have to kind of decide what makes the most logical sense and what's the easiest, most clear way to describe all the stuff you've done. So I'll leave it up to you guys, but somehow you need to have the kind of the methodology, the analysis methods, and then the results. And then after you've described your results, you should describe your proposed solution. Like, what's the big takeaway from this? What are we going to propose? And you guys have already done this a little bit in your proposal, but just kind of refine that idea. And after you propose, this is our policy solution, and here's what it's going to look like, and here's what it's going to entail. Then this conclusion section, tie it all together. Critique what you've done. What else could we do in the future? What are the ethical implications, right? Kind of summarize. What's the big picture takeaway from all this? What else should we be thinking about, right? What else would we be considering? So these are the things we're going to be looking for when we grade it. You can also kind of use this structure a little bit in your presentation, but like I said, like you may, in the presentation, you're only going to be able to have like 20 slides. So you may want to kind of cut some of this stuff out so you can focus on other stuff. So you may, for instance, not include a literature review at all in your presentation, or maybe you include like a slide where you just quickly summarize, some main points from the lit review, or maybe you don't include it at all, right? You're gonna have to decide, how you want to structure it. You can use some of this for your presentation, but like I said, you only have 20 slides, so you're gonna have to be very sort of judicious about what you include and what you don't include. You're gonna have to be very, very picky, right? Because you're only gonna have so much room and only so much time, right? There's gonna be time presentation. So, but that's the final report structure. So not so much for next class, I guess, but just over the next couple of weeks, you guys should probably keep working on your final analysis. Another thing is, as you're kind of finishing the analysis, so you can kind of write that part of the paper, you can go ahead and start working on cleaning up your lit review and your citations, kind of creating a summary of them so that you can include that in your final paper. Probably maybe clean up the introduction, the lit review, and then once you kind of have those in place, you maybe describe your data. Then once you finish the analysis, you can start finishing up the last few parts. So you can go ahead and start kind of writing the first half of this, number 1, 2, and 3. And then once you get your analysis actually done or almost done, you can kind of start to work on 4, 5, and 6 and writing that, right? So our presentations are going to be basically 2 weeks from now. So keep that in mind. We'll do that on Friday, June the 10th. So kind of keep that in mind. Friday, June the 10th, 9 a.m. Seoul time, or 8 p.m. Thursday, June 9th in Indiana, and 7 p.m. June 9th, Thursday, June 9th in Chicago. So kind of keep that in mind. That's going to be the final presentation. We're going to have some people from the embassy there and the U.S. State Department watching. The professors will be there from IU and Paul, like everybody. So we'll all be there and listening to your guys talk. We'll talk more about the presentation next week, though. On the next recorded lecture, talk more about that. So I'll wrap this up here. Hope you guys have a nice week. Good luck on working on everything. If you have any questions, please email me and let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you guys soon. Okay? All right. Thanks.